Every empire believes it controls the variables that matter, until the day it discovers those variables were controlling it. What happened 3 weeks ago wasn't supposed to be possible. A bureaucratic announcement. 14 lines of text from the Chinese Ministry of Commerce. No dramatic press conference. No ultimatum. Just export controls on rare earth elements to Japan. Within 72 hours, 400 billion yen evaporated from Japanese markets. Not from speculation, from mathematical reality. This shouldn't have mattered. Rare earths represent a fraction of global trade. Most people can't pronounce their names. Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, elements buried in supply chains, invisible to consumers, forgotten by policymakers. But empires have always fallen over resources they forgot they needed. In 1453, Constantinople controlled the Bosphorus, the gateway between Europe and Asia, the most strategic choke point in the world. Until it didn't. The Byzantine Empire had grown comfortable with its geographic monopoly. For 1,000 years, trade flowed through their waters. Taxes filled their treasuries. Power seemed permanent. When Ottoman cannons finally breached the walls, the empire discovered that controlling trade routes meant nothing if you couldn't defend them. The last emperor died defending walls that had protected the city for a millennium. The empire that called itself eternal ended in a single day. Today, China controls 70% of global rare earth production, not through conquest, through patience. 40 years of subsidizing an industry that others abandoned, building processing facilities that others found unprofitable, accepting environmental costs that others refused. The West celebrated when dirty industries moved offshore. Cleaner cities, cheaper products, someone else's pollution problem. No one calculated the strategic cost of dependence. This is not new. We've seen this before. Rome imported grain from Egypt. When that supply was threatened, the empire starved. Britain imported cotton from America. When that relationship fractured, textile cities became ghost towns. Germany imported oil from Russia. When that pipeline closed, industrial production collapsed. Every empire that expanded beyond its resource base eventually faced suppliers who understood their leverage. Supply chains are not just economics. They are control systems. And control systems fail when margins disappear. Japan discovered this when rare earth shipments stopped. Advanced manufacturing requires precise inputs. Electric vehicles need neodymium magnets that operate at extreme temperatures. Wind turbines need dysprosium cores that maintain magnetic properties under stress. Defense systems need rare earth guidance components that function in hostile environments. These are not generic commodities. These are specialized materials with specific properties that cannot be substituted. Like trying to replace steel with wood in a skyscraper. The physics don't work. Manufacturing lines designed around these materials cannot be retooled overnight. Supply contracts span years. Alternative sources take decades to develop. Processing facilities require billions in capital investment. Environmental permitting alone takes 5 to 10 years in developed countries. When the flow stops, everything stops. Within days, Japanese corporate treasuries were calculating losses, not future projections, immediate shortfalls. Toyota couldn't produce electric vehicle motors without neodymium. Panasonic faced semiconductor constraints without rare earth components. Mitsubishi's defense contracts became impossible to fulfill. Production schedules collapsed. Delivery commitments became worthless promises. Stock prices reflected mathematical reality. 400 billion yen disappeared because the mathematics of modern manufacturing had been severed. This only happens when margins are thin. When Rome controlled the Mediterranean in the 2nd century, grain shortages were manageable. Stockpiles existed across the empire. Alternative suppliers in Gaul and Hispania could be developed. Trade routes could be rerouted. The empire had geographic diversity, financial reserves, and time to respond. But by the 4th century, margins had evaporated. Population had grown beyond agricultural capacity. Barbarian pressure had increased military costs from 15% of imperial revenue to over 50%. Administrative complexity had consumed administrative efficiency. Climate change had reduced agricultural yields. Plague had decimated tax-paying populations. When the grain stopped flowing from Egypt, there was no buffer, no alternatives, no time. The empire that had survived for centuries collapsed within decades because it had optimized away its resilience. Modern economies operate on similar margins. Just-in-time manufacturing eliminates inventory costs but eliminates inventory buffers. Lean production systems maximize efficiency but minimize flexibility. Global supply chains reduce costs but create single points of failure. Maximum efficiency assumes continuous supply. When supply breaks, efficiency becomes fragility. The rare earth weapon is perfect because it exploits this fragility. Surgical precision, maximum disruption, minimal retaliation risk. China doesn't ban all exports to Japan, only specific materials that Japan absolutely needs and cannot replace quickly. This preserves larger trade relationships while demonstrating ultimate leverage. Japan still buys electronics from China, still trades in textiles and machinery, still imports consumer goods. Only the rare earths stop. So China loses minimal export revenue while inflicting maximum economic pain. The precision is what makes it devastating. Like severing a single nerve that paralyzes an entire limb. The damage is disproportionate to the action. This is how confidence starts eroding. Not through dramatic confrontations, through quiet demonstrations that the system operates at someone else's discretion. Empires maintain power through the belief that their power is permanent. Citizens assume protection, allies assume guarantees, markets assume stability. When subjects begin questioning those assumptions, control unravels. The Japanese government faces an impossible choice. Resist and watch manufacturing collapse, unemployment rise, economic growth reverse. Comply and signal that economic sovereignty is conditional, that independence exists at China's discretion. Either choice weakens the foundation of independent decision-making. Resistance proves impotence. Compliance proves dependence. There is no good option because the structural relationship has already been determined. But Japan is not the target. Japan is the demonstration. The United States imports 80% of its rare earths from China, 100% of heavy rare earths. Every F-35 fighter jet requires 420 kilograms of rare earth materials. Every guided missile uses rare earth guidance systems. Every naval vessel depends on rare earth propulsion components. Every radar system uses rare earth magnets. American defense production exists at China's discretion. Not theoretically, mathematically. The Pentagon has stockpiles for maybe 6 months of wartime production. After that, weapons manufacturing stops unless China cooperates. This is what systemic vulnerability looks like. The world's largest military power depends on its primary strategic competitor for the materials that make advanced weapons possible. When the next Taiwan crisis emerges, China won't need to sink aircraft carriers. They'll just stop shipping rare earths and watch American military production grind to halt. Historical precedent is clear. Resource dependencies become weapons when relationships deteriorate. Strategic materials become strategic liabilities when suppliers become adversaries. The British Empire learned this when American colonies controlled tobacco exports in the 1770s. Revenue disappeared overnight. The Soviet Union discovered this when Afghan opium routes were threatened in the 1980s. Every empire that expanded global supply chains eventually faced suppliers who understood their leverage. What makes this different is scale and concentration. Modern technological civilization depends on material inputs that exist in extremely concentrated geographic locations. Rare earths in China, lithium in South America, cobalt in Central Africa, semiconductor manufacturing in Taiwan. Critical materials controlled by single countries or regions. Geographic concentration of critical resources creates systemic fragilities that previous empires never faced. When supply chains spanned continents but materials were geographically abundant, alternative sources existed. When critical materials are concentrated and controlled by potential adversaries, alternatives don't exist. The margin for error approaches zero. Military strategists understand this completely. Pentagon reports have warned about rare earth dependence for over 15 years. The Defense Department funds alternative supply development, recycling programs, substitution research. But building alternative supply chains takes decades. Taiwan scenarios emerge within years. Time is the variable that matters most. Empires succeed when they have time to respond to challenges. They fail when responses take longer than challenges allow. China is not operating on American timelines. Belt and Road Initiative projects spend generations. Rare earth monopoly construction took 40 years of patient investment. Taiwan reunification planning extends beyond individual leaders, beyond election cycles, beyond quarterly earnings reports. Strategic patience versus immediate results. Long-term positioning versus short-term optimization. These are not compatible timeframes. They represent fundamentally different approaches to power. Systems behave predictably under stress. When pressure increases, they prioritize immediate stability over long-term sustainability. Short-term fixes that create long-term vulnerabilities. Emergency responses that become permanent dependencies. We see this pattern everywhere now. energy systems that abandoned nuclear power and became dependent on Russian gas, financial systems that abandoned gold backing and became dependent on central bank credibility, defense systems that abandoned domestic production and became dependent on global supply chains. Each optimization created efficiency. Each efficiency created vulnerability. Each vulnerability created potential leverage for others. This is not strength. This is response. The Japanese rare earth crisis is not an isolated incident. It's a proof of concept, a demonstration that economic weapons work better than military weapons, that supply chain disruption achieves political objectives without military conflict, that 21st century power operates through dependencies, not armies. Other nations are watching carefully. South Korea, Taiwan, Australia. Every country that depends on Chinese supply chains for critical inputs. Every alliance partner that assumed American guarantees would outweigh economic realities. What this suggests is that the assumptions underlying the current global order are being systematically tested, not through dramatic confrontations, through quiet recalibrations of who controls whom. The rare earth weapon reveals something deeper about modern power structures. Traditional military strength becomes irrelevant when industrial capacity depends on adversary cooperation. Nuclear deterrence means nothing if conventional weapons require enemy materials. This is the strategic blindness of optimization. Every system that prioritized efficiency over security, cost over resilience, specialization over redundancy now faces structural dependency on potential adversaries. The mathematics are unforgiving. Alternative suppliers don't exist at scale. Substitution technologies don't exist at all. Stockpiles last months, not years. Building independence takes decades. Meanwhile, dependencies deepen every quarter. Every new electric vehicle increases rare earth demand. Every wind turbine project expands the vulnerability. Every advanced weapon system embeds the dependency deeper into defense infrastructure. The event isn't the warning. The reaction is. When Japan's stock market fell, when manufacturing schedules collapsed, when corporate treasuries calculated impossible losses, the message was clear. Sovereignty is conditional. Independence is temporary. Power operates through control of things others need. What follows is predictable. Other countries now understand the weapon exists. They will test their own versions. Resource nationalism spreads. Supply chain security becomes national security priority. But security measures take time while vulnerabilities exist immediately. The Dutch Empire learned this during the tulip crisis of 1637. A financial system built on speculation collapsed when confidence evaporated. No external enemy caused the failure. Internal optimization had created systemic fragility. The Spanish Empire discovered this when Puerto's silver mines exhausted their easiest deposits. Imperial finances, designed around continuous precious metal flows, couldn't adjust to declining revenues. Military capacity contracted. Political influence diminished. These weren't sudden shocks. These were gradual transitions that appeared manageable until they weren't. Each quarter, each year, margins grew thinner. Alternatives became scarcer. Dependencies deepened. Until the moment when the system could no longer absorb disruption. Modern supply chains follow identical patterns. Optimization eliminates redundancy. Specialization creates concentration. Efficiency requires predictability. When predictability fails, efficiency becomes catastrophic vulnerability. The semiconductor shortage of 2021 demonstrated this principle. A pandemic disrupted production in Taiwan. Global automobile manufacturing halted for months. Electronics production slowed worldwide. The modern economy depended on chips produced in a geographic area smaller than many American states. Now imagine that disruption lasting years instead of months. Imagine it affecting 17 different materials instead of one. Imagine it being weaponized by a strategic competitor instead of caused by natural disaster. That's what the rare earth weapon represents. Economic warfare optimized for modern vulnerabilities. China understands that 21st century power operates through network effects, not territorial control. Controlling critical nodes in global networks provides leverage over the entire system. Rare earths are one critical node. Semiconductors are another. Pharmaceutical manufacturing is a third. Control the nodes. Control the network. Control the network. Control the outcome. Empires don't collapse overnight. They unravel quietly through accumulated dependencies, structural weaknesses, and strategic miscalculations that seemed reasonable when margins were comfortable. The rare earth weapon isn't the collapse. It's the demonstration that collapse is possible, that the foundation is shakier than anyone admitted. that someone else holds the switch, and history tells us what happens when switches start flipping.